Sorry, one second. I'll get this.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Connecticut Alliance to End Sexual Violence's training on nurturing healthy sexual development in kids. My name is Kelsey Alexander. I'm the Prevention and Training Manager with the Connecticut Alliance, and my colleague Amanda is here as well. Amanda, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi. I'm Amanda Mendoza. I'm also the Training and Outreach Coordinator here. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
So before we go over, we'll do a little bit more of an introduction for Amanda and myself in terms of why we're talking about this topic today. I wanted to just let you all know that as Amanda and I were preparing for this training over the last few days, we realized, so the training is 90 minutes. We will be done at 3 o'clock. We realized we really had about 3 hours worth of content that we wanted to share with you all. So rather than try to just rush through a lot of stuff and skip over things and have a very stressful experience of training, we have decided to create a part 2 for this training, which we will be holding on March 28th, which is a Tuesday, from 1:30 to 3 p.m. And I'm going to put the link for the chat if anybody would like, if you want to just have that to register for that right now. We're so happy you're all here today and hope that you will also be able to make it to part 2 of this training. And when we get into the objectives for today, you'll see sort of how we broke it up and what we're going to cover today versus what will be covered in part 2. So let me just put that in the chat. That is also going to go out on, well, if you are on one of our listservs for the Alliance calendar that we sent out, that went out this morning. So you can find the link in that calendar, but there's also a registration link right there if you would like to just be able to register right away. So that's just a little caveat before today. Also, we are recording this training. So please feel free to do what you'd like in terms of having your camera on or off. We love being able to see people's faces, and we will definitely have time at the end today for just some Q&A, and we'll be inviting folks to participate and share in different ways throughout the training. So if at any point you feel comfortable turning your camera on or unmuting, we would love for you to do that, but please do whatever you would like. All right, and I think now we can get into the introduction part of our slides here. I thought it would be helpful. This is the topic that for some of us, it might feel really obvious why nurturing healthy sexual development in kids as a topic is related to preventing sexual violence, or, you know, if we as a coalition are concerned primarily with preventing and responding to sexual violence, why we would be talking about this topic. We're going to share more information as we go throughout about the connection between growing up having healthy attitudes and beliefs and knowing some of the healthier behaviors related to sexual development, like how that, when we can nurture that in kids, is going to help keep them safe from sexual violence. I know for myself, this topic feels really important because I don't feel from both my own, my own family, as well as like my public school education that I had. We just really did not talk a ton about what was healthy, unhealthy, expected, unexpected when it came to sexual behavior, sexual development, stuff like that. And as you will see when we present some of our information today, like I know that left me with a lot of questions when I was a young person and not really knowing exactly where was like the correct or the accurate information to turn to find the answers to those questions. So that's also part of why I'm excited to be here today and talking about this.
And very similarly for myself, but I think even more recently, I have younger siblings who are currently teenagers, and they test me every single day and ask me very tough questions that at times, like, I have felt uncomfortable and been like, ooh, am I really the right person to be going to for this? But I recognize, like, for them, I am an approachable and askable adult in their life. And so I recognize that it is now my responsibility to, be providing them accurate information that's, not shaming them for asking those sorts of questions, and also relying on support from other folks that if, let's say, I don't know how to answer the question correctly, like just letting them know, you know what, that's a really great question. Let me get back to you on that. So we'll be talking about all those sorts of things. And yeah, so just thanks again for all being here.
So you're gonna go to the first bubble there, Amanda. Thanks. All right, so we wanted to just set the tone a little bit for this conversation, talking about healthy sexual development, sex, sexuality, bodies. Like, these are topics that many of us, even if we work in the anti-sexual violence field, when it comes to thinking about kids and what is healthy or typical or expected for them, and how to have conversations with young people, even really, really young people, about sexual development. These can be topics that make some of us feel uncomfortable, that we might have strong emotions or feelings about because maybe of our own experiences as kids, or the values that we hold for ourselves and our families and the kids that are in our lives. So we just want to say that from the beginning, that the goal here for the next hour and 20 minutes is not to put anyone in a place of feeling ashamed or embarrassed about anything that you may have done or not done when it comes to these topics and working with young people. But we're all just here to learn. I learned a ton doing the research for this presentation, of things that and thinking back on my own experiences, like teaching children, working with children, things that I definitely could have done differently in the past that would have been more helpful to them probably. So that's just an acknowledgement of that. Please take care of yourself throughout the training today. You can, as we've said, have your cameras on or off. If you want to take a break and step away from the computer, please do that. If you're having a snack or having your lunch or drinking coffee or whatever you're doing, please continue to do that. We will do some breakout rooms today and have some opportunities for folks to share in a few different ways. So as we're doing that, people might say things that you disagree with, or you think, oh, I would never ever say that to a kid, or I would never ever do that in my family. Please just be respectful to one another. We can certainly disagree. We can certainly talk about why we disagree, but we're going to do that coming from a place of respect. And we're going to maintain confidentiality of any stories or experiences that people share in this space. I know many of us are mandated reporters. I don't expect that that's going to be a concern here today, but we just include that caveat as well. Did we miss anything? Is there anything else in terms of our expectations of one another for the next hour or so that anybody would like to add? All right, I'm going to assume we mostly covered it, but if anything comes up during the training, please feel free to let us know. So these are our learning objectives for all of the content that Amanda and I were originally planning to share with you today. Really what's going to happen today, if you joined just a few minutes late, you might have missed me saying that we have decided to break the presentation into two parts. Part one, we're going to have today, and at a later date, which is March 28th, we are going to be doing part two. I did just get a message requesting a 5-minute bathroom break partway through the training. I think we can probably accommodate that. So I'll think about that for a minute and in just a second about where we want to put that in, but we can probably do that. So we realized we just had way too much content to include in a 90-minute training. So you will see on the slide here that the third and fourth objectives we are actually not going to be covering today. We're going to do that in part two of the training. So today we are going to work with you all to understand healthy sexual behaviors of children at different ages and developmental stages, and to recognize concerning sexual behaviors. And when we get to part two in a few weeks, that is going to be more thinking about answering children's questions and just having conversations with young people about sex and sexuality, and sharing a whole lot of resources that might be useful to you.
Okay, so before we dive right into healthy sexual development and exploration, we have to do what is sexuality? So I think many folks, when they hear the word sexuality, they probably are thinking about, sex and attraction. But it's actually much more than that. It's about our values. It's about the attitudes of how we view other people around us, as well as ourselves, the feelings that we share with other people, how we interact and how we behave. And so sexuality also isn't just emotional or physical, it's also social and cultural. And sexual development actually begins much, much earlier in life than puberty. It begins at birth. And so, and you might be thinking, oh dear, infants, thinking about sexuality. But infants and children don't necessarily think about sexuality in the same way that we do as adults, but they are learning and they're interpreting messages related to sexuality that is going to shape, their future actions and behaviors as they grow older. So, for one example, let's say a 3-year-old is starting to remove their clothes in front of people. They don't necessarily have, the idea that the social norm is to not take your clothes off in front of people. So as a parent, maybe you'll approach them and say, hey, it's okay to be naked when you're taking a bath, or maybe when you're in your room and changing your clothes, but not in front of others. And, so that 3-year-old is now interpreting, okay, so like, this is my body. And when I don't have clothes on, that means I'm naked, and being naked in front of people is only okay, like certain times, but not other times. And that could change as they get older, right? Like if a parent is helping them bathe, for example, but then maybe at a certain age, it's okay that they can bathe by themselves and they don't necessarily need that help. So, right, that child is progressively learning over time kind of what is culturally and socially acceptable, while also trying to understand their own body and what that all means. So just think of sexuality as an umbrella term that encompasses, excuse me, many different things. Some of those things being anatomy and physiology. So that's all of our body parts and how they work and how they function. For gender identity, that means that is a person's internal sense and individual experience of gender. So for example, that's their sense of either feeling like they are, a woman or a man, maybe both, maybe neither, somewhere along that gender spectrum. And that could be the same or different from the sex that they're assigned at birth. So for example, typically a doctor is the person that assigns a baby their sex right when they're born. Typically, they'll look at the genitalia and say, yep, that's a boy. But later on, that boy at that time might later decide, actually, I don't really know like how I feel. Maybe I'm somewhere on the spectrum. Maybe they're on the opposite side of things. And right, that's that internal sense of gender. So that is something that grows and develops over time. Gender expression is how we express our identity. So that could be through appearance, that could be through our hair, our clothing, how we behave, our body language. And it's important to note that someone's gender identity doesn't always lead to, a certain gender expression. So for example, just because, I identify as a woman doesn't necessarily mean that, I love the color pink and I always, want to wear like dresses and wear makeup and play with, Barbie dolls and all those sorts of things. So gender expression is also, on a spectrum and can vary greatly and does not depend on what a person's identity is. However, it could be influenced by someone's gender identity. But just recognize that those are two separate things. Feelings. So for younger children, that's kind of like the warmth and closeness that they feel with someone. So that could be like, their caregivers. That's kind of like their first attachment that they have as they're, an infant. But later on, maybe, as they're going into their adolescence, the feelings is more so about their attraction towards perhaps other adolescents, or as they grow into an adult, their attraction to other adults. And sexual expression being how we express sexuality in general. So again, this might be for older children, how they build healthy relationships with people, how they can express their attraction in healthy ways. So yeah, these are some of the things that fall under the umbrella of sexuality. Again, a reminder, this is not just about sex or just about sexual Well, it is sexual exploration, but it's not just about sex or, attraction. It encompasses all these things. And just know that sexuality, just as, people, right, we change across our lifespan, and that children do indeed have a sexuality. And we're going to dive right into that a little bit more. But this is going to be the time that we dive into going into breakout rooms. But I'll ask, are there any questions on this slide before we move forward? We'll also have time for questions at the end too. So if it doesn't come up now, that's fine. And some of the questions might be answered later. So that could also potentially happen.
All right.
Okay. Oh yeah, so we'll move right along. So we're going to break out into groups of about 3 to 4 people. And there's going to be some questions here that you'll see on our slides. And so each group's going to have a different designated set of questions that they'll answer, and we'll give you about 5 minutes to answer these amongst your group.
So the question, I'm going to put all the questions in the chat, but then your group is only going to be responsible for answering like 2 of the questions that you currently see on the screen. So we'll go based on room number. So I'm making 8 rooms, and let's see. We'll say that rooms 1, 2, and 3 are going to focus on set number 1. So when you get assigned to a breakout room, just note like what number room you're going into. So if you are in rooms 1, 2, or 3, then you're going to answer questions from set 1. If you're in 4, 5, or 6, you're going to answer questions from set 2. And if you're in room 7 or 8, you're going to answer questions from set 3. Okay. And feel free to use the chat if you have any questions about that, but let me put those questions in the chat and then we'll send you into breakout rooms. As Amanda said, we're going to do this for 5 minutes.
How's your breakout room going?
Right.
I'm back.
Huh? Yeah, I think everybody's back now. Welcome, everyone.
Yes, welcome back, everyone. So thank you for participating in that discussion exercise. So I guess we'll just start with those of you who answered set A of questions. So where did you primarily get messages about sexuality as a child? And what messages did you get? Are you satisfied with how you learned about it? Feel free to share if you feel comfortable on what kind of was talked about in your group. Or you could type in the chat. Would anyone feel comfortable sharing?
I'll share. So we answered, and I think we all kind of came to the conclusion that we were a little dissatisfied of how our conversations went, if we had conversations at all, and just where we got the information from. So there was very little in-depth conversation where, you can actually understand everything on a full scale. So we were given like bits and pieces, but mostly from like school or from a conservative view or opposing views, because we wanted to talk about it, but then society had these very constrictive gender roles, and it was just kind of conflicting back and forth. And then you're left kind of feeling like, okay, I kind of get it, kind of don't get it, still have a whole bunch of other questions, and who do I turn to?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, thank you so much for sharing it, right? Like you're getting all these conflicting messages from different places that maybe are only giving you half the information, but you're not even sure if that's half the information or all of it. So yeah, that can be incredibly confusing, especially if you're just a child trying to learn and grow in this environment. Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else want to share from the set A questions?
In the chat, we also just got a comment that it seems like for this person's group, people did not in school really learn about any of this.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. I see it now. Had to scroll up. Yeah. So it's sounding like there really wasn't much conversations really happening whatsoever. Great. Well, not great, but thank you for sharing. What about from set B? Where do children get messages today, and which messages do children get that are perhaps healthy or unhealthy?
So in the chat, we've got social media and friends.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just share really quick. I noticed that with nieces and nephews, especially between the ages of like 7, 8, 9, 10, YouTube, even like the kids directed YouTube has become a big thing of watching people play video games and stream things. And also the influencer age that we're going through right now, like that's also being channeled towards children. And sometimes the messages they get through there are things that they can't even understand, but they're being like almost trained to have certain opinions and views by adults who are creating these videos geared towards children.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for sharing. So definitely social media is having a huge impact, or even, websites that really haven't even been around for, probably less than 20 years or so, having a huge impact on media consumption that kids and youth are taking in. And also this new sphere of having influencers, right? People to look up to. Maybe back then could have been like celebrities, I suppose, actors, but being on YouTube, like anyone and everyone can, post whatever they want on the internet, which also means that there isn't really any filter for what information is being put on the internet and who has access to them. So it's very much that children have, this information, be it healthy or unhealthy or somewhere in between, right at the tips of their fingers. So yeah, also really great examples. And I guess I'll ask for the groups that were in set C, why is it important to nurture healthy sexual development? And if you feel comfortable sharing, what healthy or perhaps unhealthy messages could you be giving children right now, whether that's unintentional or otherwise, whatever you feel comfortable sharing. And that's okay if you don't know also, because, right, the whole purpose of this training is to kind of talk about what is sexual development, and what does it mean to nurture healthy sexual development in children. So, feel free to type something in the chat again if you feel comfortable. But, some examples I could think of what could have been unhealthy, messages that maybe I had received like back in the day was, you're not allowed to date until, you're 18 years old. And right, but there wasn't really an explanation as to why. Like maybe the explanation could have been, well, focus on school. And that was probably the end of it. But, understanding now as I'm, older too, that perhaps, my family or my parents, they had fears that would come with, the idea of dating. What did that mean? Were they fearful of, perhaps unwanted pregnancy from happening or sex? But they didn't, say that exactly. And there could have been a conversation about like healthy relationships and, sexual health, for example. But instead, I was just given the message, don't date. And so, as people were saying before, where are people going to learn these messages, or where are children going to learn these messages? Okay, well, now they're going to go ask their friends about maybe the relationships that they're in. They're going to see things on social media, and or potentially what message could we be sending to children if we are saying things like, you can't do that, don't do this, but not really explaining things, is now knowing, okay, well, maybe I can't go to you to ask these certain questions. And that could create a level of secrecy that maybe, not maybe, is unhealthy because we want to know what's going on in our children's lives. So yeah, but thank you so much for participating in that discussion.
We got a comment in the chat too. It's kind of in line with what you're saying, but a message just being that like, we don't want to talk about this, or it's uncomfortable to talk about sex, sexuality, bodies, like anything like that. That's definitely a message I got when I was younger from, not even necessarily from things that people verbally said to me, but just like the discomfort that I could feel from adults. If I ever had a question, or if one of my siblings had a question, or a friend or somebody.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you for sharing that. Whoever did send it, I can't see it, but yeah, and like that could increase like more risk, right? Because if a child is learning, okay, I'm not allowed to like bring this up, or I can't ask these certain questions, or I should feel ashamed about thinking about these things. Now that means, you know, they're carrying everything internally. They're not going to share that information. Meaning, how are they supposed to learn what is perhaps unsafe for them to be, you know, involved in, or to be experiencing? So, you know, kids who don't have that access to like accurate and like non-shaming information about like sex or sexuality, they're just at a greater risk of developing unhealthy attitudes and beliefs about not only their own sexuality, but potentially others around them as well. And kids, as we know, they will look for this information, but the question is, where are they going to get it from if it's not you? So ultimately, you know, providing them with the language and, you know, giving them answers to the questions that they may have, and understanding where that curiosity and exploration is coming from, like ultimately does provide them safety. You know, as earlier on, we were talking about child sexual abuse prevention, and this is an aspect that does promote kind of protective factors in preventing sexual abuse, because now you are an approachable, askable adult. If you are able to provide that, you know, sense of safety and trust and comfort for them to come to you. But we'll talk more about what that can look like. So yeah, thank you again for participating.
Can I just jump in here for a
Oh
second?
yeah, of course.
When I was young, I went to my mother and asked about sex and, you know, just general stuff. And her answer was, ask your sister. So she had probably barely told my sister anything. And my sister certainly could not tell me anything that my mother had told her. So I was just totally without any information at all.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was a long time ago. I think people are doing better now, but.
Right. Yeah. No, thank you so much for sharing that story. And I'm sure, you know, being that young and, you know, hearing from a parent, oh, go ask this person, right? It sends the message of, you can't ask me those things, so go to someone else. And so, yeah, and that, again, that contributes to either more confusion or a chance for not potentially receiving a healthy message about sexuality.
I never asked again.
Yeah. Yeah. So it had a powerful impact, you know, so, and that's exactly why we're talking about this today. So thank you so much though for sharing.
All right, so we're gonna very soon get into looking at some of the sort of typical or common behaviors that we see in different kids of different ages that sort of fall into this realm of healthy sexual development or healthy sexual exploration. So a few just grounding ideas that we want to start with. One is that sexual development is just as important as physical, cognitive, or emotional development in children. I think when kids are very, very young, we don't think about them as being sexual beings, and they're not, in the sense of how we as adults like think of what it means to be sexual, or think about what sexuality is. But sexual development is a reality for kids of every single age. And you'll see some examples of that when we get into these different stages of healthy sexual development. All children need to have caring adults in their lives who help nurture their healthy sexual development by providing information that is accurate, non-shaming, and developmentally appropriate. And we will give some more concrete examples of some of those things in part 2 of the training, in terms of like, how would you answer a kid's question, or how can you make use of a teachable moment? talk about, to provide information that is non-shaming and is going to be useful to a child. But this is just some of the baseline of where we want to start with for today. So in general, all the points that are on the screen right here, and we are going to provide the slides to all of you, so feel free to listen and not rush to take notes on everything if you don't want to. The points that are on the slide right now are all indicators that a child's behavior, particularly when it involves another child, kids definitely can have sexual behaviors or sexual exploration just with their own body and things that they might do for themselves, or questions they might ask a parent or things like that. But a lot of sexual exploration sort of shows up in the way that kids interact with other kids. So the things on the screen right now are intended to be sort of guideposts for if I'm observing a behavior and I'm not really sure if it's like okay or not, or is it healthy or not? Should I be telling them to stop doing what they're doing? These are some of the things that are indicators that this is actually quite normal. It's very healthy, expected. That doesn't mean that you can't set a boundary around it or say, that's actually don't want you to be doing this. I'm not comfortable with it, or what have you. We don't want to shame a child for doing something that is just normal or out of curiosity, but these are what healthy sexual exploration and some of those behaviors might look like. So in general, when kids are engaging in healthy behaviors, it is with kids who are of similar age, size, and developmental stage as themselves. So it is not, a teenager and a 9-year-old, right? They're not the same age. They're not the same size, probably. They are not the same developmental stage. That is something that we would want to stop or want to have some questions about. But kids that are about the same age, same size, very frequently, we're going to see some of these behaviors, and that's not much to be concerned about. Other things that lead us to conclude something is probably just healthy and normal is when the behaviors, the activities are voluntary and consensual. So a kid is not like forcing another kid to play a game or to show them part of their body or touch part of their body or anything like that. There's no force, there's no convincing or anything. It's just kids engaging in play, doing things because they both want to. This kind of behavior, when it's healthy, is more exploratory than overtly sexual in nature. Kids are curious about a lot of things, and that curiosity sometimes leads them to wonder things about their body, about somebody else's body, to want to look at somebody's body or touch their body or something like that. When it's coming from a place of curiosity, that's normal. It's just very expected. It is part of their sexual development. Obviously, we would want to stop, or it would raise some red flags for us if there was any behavior happening that felt like it was aggressive or hostile or hurting either the child themselves or another kid. That's obviously something we're going to that's going to come to our attention right away. Kids who play together frequently and know each other really well that's just sort of where this kind of stuff is more likely to happen. It's less common, or would be less expected, for a kid to be doing something that feels sexual or potentially inappropriate with a stranger or a kid that they just met on the playground or they met for the first time at a party or something like that. It's much more normal for this to be happening between cousins, siblings, kids who are friends and play together all the time. Children's sexual exploration is unplanned, spontaneous, and infrequent. And you can see from the last bullet on the slide here above the flower in the corner, these kinds of behaviors they should be balanced by a child's other curiosities and interests in their life. So kids might be curious about sex or about bodies, but they're also curious about, I don't know, the garbage truck or what this kid said in class to them today, or what have you, like lots and lots of other things. They have lots of other interests. There is a healthy amount of time that a kid might spend asking questions or thinking about things like sex and sexuality, but it's not going to be the dominating thing in their life. And then the last one on here we didn't talk about yet is that healthy sexual exploration is easily diverted when caregivers tell children to stop, or when they set some sort of boundary or limit around the behavior. So, if you as an adult told a few kids, hey, I don't really want you playing that game, or, we have rules about privacy in this family, and what you guys are doing right now is not really in line with our rules about privacy, so I need you to stop that. That should be enough to get the kids to sort of move on and engage in something else. So this is not like an end all be all list, and certainly neither Amanda nor we are not psychologists or anything like that. But this is just some general guidance for things that when you're seeing it happen and it sort of falls into some of these guidelines right here, it's not something that we need to feel concerned or panicky about. As I said, though, it doesn't mean that you can't have a conversation about something you're seeing, or tell a kid that I'd really like you to stop doing that. That's okay. There's still room in here for us to set our own limits and talk about things like privacy. And, Amanda gave the example of kids wanting to take their clothes off. Totally fine when we're at home, or you're taking a bath, or you're in your bedroom. Not so much when we're at our friend's house and you're hanging out with some other kids. That's a great example of a limit that it is totally healthy and appropriate to set.
So now we're going to kind of dive into the different developmental stages throughout childhood and what sexual development and exploration can look like for those ages. Oh, all right, we're zooming in and we're going. All right. So focusing between the ages of 0 to 2, so infant to about very early toddlerhood. So what are some sexual behaviors that you might see children commonly displaying at this age? So they're going to be exploring and touching their body and, their genitalia, whether that be in public or in private. That's mostly stemming from, again, a curiosity about their body, but also it's self-soothing. So they could be rubbing the private parts or the genitalia of their body with their hand, or maybe against certain objects. And, for boys, this could lead to erections, which is also perfectly normal. That is an automatic, normal body response to self-soothing in that area. And, again, just want to say, there are some parents who have in the past called the hotline, worried that, they saw that their child was, touching themselves, and they thought that perhaps this could have been a sign of their child being sexually abused. Again, totally makes sense why the parent would call and be fearful and concerned. But this is actually a very normal sexual behavior that you would see for this age and some of the ages that we'll be talking about later. But of course, if there were any other environmental sort of factors or signs, such as marks or bruises on the body that are unexplained, or any sort of discomfort that you see that the child is in, then of course there are some more levels of concern there. But if it is just, an infant touching their genitalia, that's also completely normal. So you'll also find at this age, there's no inhibitions around nudity whatsoever. That's not necessarily a social norm that they've come to learn yet, but as they get older, they'll start to learn those things. At this stage, they're also, showing affections towards their main caregivers, most likely their parents, through hugs and kisses and cuddles. This is where they're learning about love and trust from their caregivers. Parents are, that baby's earliest attachment. So that's also how, they're learning to, I guess, trust and have also a positive sense of themselves if they also feel loved and cared for and safe. And as well as babies are developing a positive and negative self-esteem through play with their parents or their caregivers. So a way that we can build confidence in a child is, having them sort of feel like if they've accomplished something, or if they learned a new thing, and, letting them know you did it, yay, smiling, laughing, clapping with them. That is giving the baby a positive sense of oh, I did something, I can do it, and that they still feel safe and loved, and that makes them feel good about themselves. So we wouldn't want to, yell or shame the baby. Like if they were, touching, their parts, not to yell at them, be like, stop doing that. Cause then, right, then it's starting at a very early age, like learning about like that shame, that fear, that these are things that they can't do, and also probably not technically conceptually understand quite yet, but we can start to have more of those discussions later on as they get older. So how can we continue to nurture that healthy sexual development with those children in our lives? So continuing to develop that trust, and maintaining boundaries with them, meeting their needs and providing them that support, helping them understand how to interact respectfully with other peers of that same age with them. So, right. So for example, like we were saying before, with like the clothing example of not being like naked around their friends. I mean, of course, if they're infants, that's a little different, but as they, are getting older, that'll look different. You can teach them the correct names of their body parts, such as, letting them know that they have like a penis or a vagina, and just kind of explaining like very, very basic information of the differences between male and female anatomy. And yeah, just giving them simple answers and questions about their body and their bodily functions, just so that, they start to hear those words, they're starting to make connections to what those are on their body. And yeah, so that's what that looks like from 0 to 2. As we move forward to 2 to 4. Some sexual behaviors that you might commonly see is they're starting to begin to understand what gender identity is, whether that be through, kids that they're seeing at school and like the differences with how like kids are dressed, or maybe they're watching TV shows, and or how, their parents may be expressing like their genders at home. So how children can explore that is they do consensual and playful exploration with other children of the same age. Maybe they're playing house, maybe they're playing doctor with each other. And at this age, they're also aware of the differences from each other's bodies, or gender differences, such as like their genitalia. So they might show, a curiosity in regards to like adult bodies, for example. So maybe they, they're running to go to the bathroom with their parents, and just are intrigued and interested in, again, it's from a curiosity. It's not any sort of, stemming from like sexual pleasure or anything like that. You may also see children, talking about their body parts. Maybe they have like a certain, slang term that they use to describe their body parts, whether they learn that from family or maybe they heard about it, at school. Well, actually, maybe this is like preschool age, but, they're learning terminology for their body parts. You may still continue to see occasional masturbation during this time. Again, it is more of a soothing behavior rather than for sexual pleasure. It may still be occurring like publicly or privately. So that's a time where, again, you'd want to address like, when just similarly, like for, we could be naked like in the bathroom or in your room. Like you can only, touch those parts of your body when like you're in your room and you're alone, and just kind of like setting the tone for that, like not necessarily telling them you're not allowed to do this, you can't do that, because again, that is also a perfectly normal exploration of their body and their sexuality. And again, it's a soothing behavior that they currently have. Some other things that might continue, they might still not have a inhibition around nudity, so they might still be trying to take off their diapers, take off their clothes. So again, just addressing, letting them learn or help them understand what privacy is, when things are appropriate and inappropriate. And well, this is also I'm kind of tying into how do we nurture healthy development at this age range. They might also start to ask questions about, maybe where do babies come from, or, why doesn't, my sister have a penis? And you could respond to those questions, again, accurately in a non-shaming way, very basic information about our bodies or about reproduction. And then as they get older, they continue to ask more questions. You can feel free to share more of that information. They may also at times, maybe because they're curious about, their parents' bodies or adult bodies, they might try to touch, a person's breasts, or maybe, the parent's breasts. Again, not inherently sexual. It's out of curiosity. And again, just letting them know that there are boundaries that people have. So this is also a really great time to be teaching them boundaries, not only with their friends, but perhaps also with, their parents. So if they are continuing, let's say, to follow you to the bathroom, you could start to ask, oh, I need privacy to use the bathroom. Is that okay if you wait outside the door? Just so that they can start to, hear those words, learn what that looks like. And then hopefully they will also be practicing that as they are learning. But yeah, ultimately it is best not to scold them, because that's going to prompt a sense of guilt and shame. We want them to just understand why privacy and boundaries are important, or why, self-soothing or touching should be done in private. And also letting them know that, no one, not even family members or other people that they trust, should ever touch them in a way that makes them feel uncomfortable or unsafe. So this is also a really great time to talk about how, that their boundaries should also be respected. So they don't need to be forced to, hug or kiss a family member if they don't want to. That's really okay. They could do a high five if they want, or they could just say wave, hello, and walk away. And we respect that. And if at any point in time throughout, any of these stages of development, if you're, caring for a child, or you have a child in your life that you're supporting, if you're ever embarrassed or confused or not sure how to approach, a question that comes up, feel free to talk with your family and friends. They may also have advice, or just be really helpful to brainstorm with other adults on how to navigate this. Again, we have this here on the ages 2 to 4 slide, but this could really go for anything and everything. So, right. There's a lot of information coming, so we'll definitely take a break after the stages. Don't worry. Okay. So for ages 4 to 6, there we go. So you might be receiving endless questions about, where do babies come from? And again, why doesn't my sibling have this body part? So again, still just answer honestly, matter-of-factly as possible. Being truthful now in this stage will encourage kids to keep coming to you with their questions in the future, and know that you're a safe person that they can go to talk about these things. We don't want them to feel, ashamed or guilty, or feel like, they have to, go somewhere else or go to someone else to ask these questions, whether that be their friends or YouTube or those sorts of things. Because they may not always get the correct information there. And so, for example, you don't necessarily need to go into elaborate detail about how babies are made. However, you could say, a man and a woman, they can make a baby, and the baby grows inside the woman's uterus or the woman's belly. And children books can also be handy here as well. And then there's also probably books out there too that can explain the differences of how some children's parents, it's not always a mom and a dad. Sometimes it could be 2 moms or 2 dads, and explain those differences as well. Because, as children going to school, they're also going to meet other children who have different life experiences than they do. So it's just important to get them acquainted, to understanding that not everyone's life looks exactly the same. Not everyone's bodies look the same. So yes, children books can be super, super handy here. So this is also a stage where children may start to want to have privacy when they're dressing and using the bathroom, right? So this is what they've learned in the previous stage, that, you know, this is something, oh, my parents are asking for, and this is what I'm learning. So this is what I want too. And again, still may be curious about bodies. So if they're spending time with their peers around the same age and developmental level, they could still be playing house and playing doctor. They may be mimicking how they see adults showing affection. So it may not be, I mean, it could be surprising, of course, walking in and potentially seeing maybe your child is kissing another child. But also it could be, you know, what they see from Disney movies, right? Kisses are shared in movies and TV shows. So that is also a perfectly normal example of sexual play that could be happening. But of course, just as Kelsey said before, you are allowed to step in and say, hey, you know, it's important that like we have like boundaries here, and like, so you can still like set those rules. But again, it's important to not be reactive or show anger or show, you know, fear. Just approach them calmly. And, you know, just so that they know, okay, it wasn't necessarily that they did something wrong, but it's something that they're still like learning about. And they, you know, they may still have questions. They may still be curious about, you know, other people's bodies and things that they see. And you can explain those things to them. So some of this we already mentioned, but as far as nurturing their healthy development when these things are happening. So again, explain the basics of reproduction, respect the privacy that they have, and understand that, again, there may still be occasional masturbation that could be happening that is still soothing behavior, but just helping them understand that if they're gonna, you know, be undergoing self-soothing behavior, that that's done in private and not in public spaces, so that they can learn to understand that more. And also just not forcing children to have any physical contact with other people if that makes them uncomfortable. So again, you might see some repetition from the previous slide, but again, it's just that children need reinforcement to keep learning. And that's ultimately what's going to help them learn to understand more about themselves and their bodies, learn about other people, the social norms around sexuality. And ultimately, you know, they also learn too, like, okay, if my boundaries are respected, then potentially when they grow up and, you know, they have friends, maybe, you know, they have a partner someday, this is like instilling the foundational bricks of like confidence and like self-respect, but also knowing that no one else should be pushing their boundaries either. Because, you know, my parents respected me, so that means you have to respect me too. Or at least that's what I'm hoping. But ultimately, yeah. So this is, I think commonly parents or adults might think, well, my child's only, you know, 4 years old, 5 years old. We don't need to talk about any of this. That's, you know, maybe this is like high school stuff. But if we wait until then to talk about all these things, it's not that it would be too late, but there's, as we talked about before, so much information that these children would be receiving from social media or from their friends already, that there's going to be a lot more information that they've gathered up until this point that you're trying to dismantle and reteach them. So it's just best to start as early as possible.
I think I'm going to give, before actually we go into the rest of the ages here, I think I'm going to give folks a 3-minute break. So if anybody wants to,
okay,
you want to go to the bathroom, get up for a minute. Also, this is a good time if you're going to still be sitting at your computer. If you've thought of any questions that you want to put in the chat, we won't maybe address them until the end of the training, but if you want to put them in the chat now, you can take a minute or two to do that. So we will start the content again in about 3 minutes. All right, I am going to keep going because we are a little bit behind time. I'm also going to probably go through the next set of ages like fairly quickly because we will provide you with the slides and another great resource from NSVRC that talks about all of this in more detail. So that's what I'm going to plan to do for the next little bit here. All right, so now we're talking about kids ages 6 to 8. So some of the common behaviors we see at this age, kids might start to talk about having a boyfriend or a girlfriend, sort of in like an abstract way. This is something they hear adults talk about, or they hear about on TV, and maybe their friends talk about it. So they might talk about this themselves. They do start to really deepen their understanding of gender roles. And what that might look like is kids starting to adjust their own behavior a little bit to sort of behave more in line with peers that are the same gender as them. So, you know, maybe you have a kid who never really wanted to dress in sort of a stereotypically feminine or masculine way. And now, like at this age, you might see them doing that a little more just to feel like they're doing what their peers are doing. They have typically very strong same-sex relationships at this age. And kids definitely, ages 6 to 8, like tell a lot of jokes about their body parts, or they talk about their body parts in a funny way or a gross way, or like that. All of that is just very funny to kids at this age. They have a lot of slang to talk about their body parts. And that might include, again, kids talking about stuff that feels a little more like sexual, or like they're using words that we more associate with things like sex and sexuality. For them, really at this age, it's just all about like curiosity and what makes them laugh and what makes their friends laugh. So things we can continue to do at these ages to support them. This is an age where talking about puberty, especially like the upper end of this age bracket, we're talking about puberty does become relevant for kids. And so we want to do that and answer any questions they have about what's happening to their body, what's happening to their friends' bodies, things they might hear their peers talk about. Share your values related to sexuality and how you want other people to be treated. We can do this at much younger ages too, when we talk about, you know, respecting other people's bodies, and we don't hit people and we don't hug people if they don't want us to, and things like that. But you can start to have a little bit more in-depth conversations about why in our family or in our community, you know, we think it's important that people have their bodies be respected, and we don't do things to people that make them feel uncomfortable. And you can continue to answer questions they have about reproduction or any other questions related to sex or sexuality that might come up. It's also a really good idea. You might start at this age to hear some misunderstanding about where babies come from, or what, you know, why certain bodies look one way or the other. It's just a good idea to correct that information in language that a kid can understand. You can go to the next one, Amanda. Thanks. Kids ages 8 through 12 will start to ask their peers, or maybe look on social media if they're of an age where they have access to social media, or just other parts of the internet, for information about sex and bodies and sexuality. I know when I was, you know, this is sort of like late elementary school and early middle school age. I can remember being a middle school student, and there was like a book in our library that just had like tons of pictures. It was like an anatomy book, like all these pictures of like drawings of naked adult bodies, right? And that was like a huge thing when I was in 6th grade, that like kids would go find that book and like look at all the pictures, right? Very, very normal behavior in this age range. Kids might start to compare themselves to their peers, both in terms of, well, this is what my body looks like, this is what their body looks like, but also in terms of how much knowledge they feel like they have compared to their peers. So if a kid feels like they're friends with somebody who knows a lot, maybe because they've got an older sibling, or this is just something their family talks about all the time, someone who seems to know a lot about sex or adult relationships or things like that. That's something that a child can become aware of, that like, oh, I know more or I know less than my peers. And we start to see some more real attraction between kids at this age, of the same gender, of different genders, where they might not necessarily be talking about, they may be talking about having a boyfriend or girlfriend, but they are probably starting to feel some of that actual attraction to some of their peers. So at these ages, some of the things we can do to support healthy development is to encourage critical thinking of the media, whatever they are taking in, television, movies, social media. How does media represent people, relationships, bodies, sexuality? To ask questions, to get kids to think about, this is what's happening on this show that you really like to watch. How does that make you feel about yourself? How does that make you feel about your peers? Continue to use non-shaming language to discuss puberty, masturbation, and privacy. So lots and lots of validation for kids that whatever's happening to their body at this point is very normal. It's expected. Not that it's always fun or it's always comfortable, but validate that, you know, there's nothing wrong with their body. They're not weird. There's nothing strange happening to them. And it's okay to have a lot of different feelings about changes that might be happening to their body at this point. And continue, as always, to promote bodily autonomy and respect for others' bodies. And our last age bracket here is quite large. This is sort of our preteen all the way up through like the beginnings of adulthood, or the legal adulthood age. It's hard to think of 18-year-olds as adults, but some common sexual behaviors that we might see for people in this age bracket: an increase in sexual thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Certainly there are plenty of kids that are in relationships in this age. Kids are starting to engage in lots of different sexual behaviors with their peers, with a boyfriend or a girlfriend. And it's a really great thing to be talking about all of that. Even if it feels, as Amanda said before, like, oh, isn't my kid a little young for me to be talking about this? We don't always know 100% what's going on in their lives. So it's a good idea to talk about some of the expectations and the values that we have as a family, or whatever your relationship is with this child, before they're needing to like practice those skills and practice those values in a really potentially tense or intimate situation with another person. At this age, kids are developing deeper understanding of their role, both in their family, in their friend groups, in their school, if they're in a romantic relationship of some kind, more thoughts and feelings about their identities, their orientation. And they're likely seeking out a lot of information about sex and bodies and relationships. And it's very likely that even if we are the most non-judgmental person in the world, they're not going to always come to us to seek out information about all this stuff. Probably they're getting some of it from their peers, some of it from the internet. So as I think we'll see in the next, you can click to the next part, Amanda. One of the things that we can do, well, it's actually not on here, but another thing that we can do for young people in this age is help them figure out where are the places, if they're going to go looking for information not from you, how can they tell if the information they're getting is really good and if it's something they should listen to? So a little bit of that like media literacy and information literacy. What kinds of websites are giving us good and accurate information about our bodies, and which ones are going to probably tell us some stuff that's not true? Other things we can do to nurture healthy development here is to support teenagers in exploring or challenging the gender roles that they might find themselves feeling pressured to fit into or to break out of. Just really being supportive of whatever your kid's gender expression and exploration looks like at this age. Provide access for teens to see a healthcare provider to discuss safer sex options. Again, this depending on the developmental stage of the child and the conversations that you may have had with this child. It might feel a little early to be doing this around age 12, but it also for some kids is not too early to start having conversations with a healthcare provider about what does safer sex look like, or how do we protect against things like STIs with a whole range of different kinds of sexual behaviors. And continue to use non-shaming language to discuss sex and safety. All right. I know this is a lot of information, but I think this next part Amanda's gonna go through is really interesting.
Yeah, so again, we know this was a ton of information, and we'll definitely leave room for questions at the end. And we'll stay over a little extra in case folks want to, stay extra, then feel free. So yeah, so we just showed you a bunch of kind of stages of healthy childhood sexual development, what healthy sexual exploration can look like, and where, childhood sexual behaviors are generally coming from a sort of harmless curiosity. However, there are some behaviors that can fall under what we would consider concerning sexual behaviors. And we call it concerning because it kind of indicates a little bit of like a red flag of kind of wondering, where is this coming from? Is this stemming from potentially any harmful material or harmful behaviors that could be happening to the child that they are now exhibiting this other harmful behavior and like continuing to show that? And what I want you all to kind of keep in mind, if you are to see these behaviors happen, it is incredibly, incredibly important to not react with any sort of hostility. And because again, we want to be mindful and curious and approach the child with questions and just try to understand where these behaviors are coming from before we jump to any conclusions. So of course, as I had mentioned before, sometimes parents could call the hotline and say, does this mean my child was sexually abused? And ultimately, right, I mean, me on the hotline, I can't necessarily answer those questions, but I can help support you in kind of navigating how to ask questions to your child to kind of get, to the root of what's happening and then provide supports from there. But also some adults might react in fear of, oh no, I just saw this and I want to pretend like I didn't see it, or I want to believe that it's not anything bad, so I'll just dismiss it. So while we don't want to act, or be overreactive, we also don't want to dismiss this behavior either. So again, just be mindful, be curious, ask your child questions about the behavior and about their attitudes surrounding that. And valuable information will come from them and give you a sense of direction of what next steps could be from here. So these are some examples of behaviors that can fall outside of the realm of healthy or common. So if a child is preoccupied with sexual play and they can't really be redirected. So as we were saying before, like, typically if you were to stop a child and say, hey, like, now's not really the time to be, doing this, you can do that in private, or I'd like for you to stop. But it's something that's happening daily and isn't really stopping, that could be a concerning sexual behavior to look into and kind of look further. Also, if there's any sexual play happening between children that have a large age difference between each other. So for example, like a 10-year-old who's, doing sexual play with a 4-year-old, it's not exactly, very common that you would see that. So it would be important to address and set those boundaries and just keep an eye on what's happening there. Any sort of knowledge of sex beyond the age for that developmental stage. So for example, like if you see maybe a 3-year-old who may be trying to kiss an adult's genitals, for example, and the adult could be fully clothed, like that could also raise a red flag or an alarm to, like, where is this, child receiving this information from? So it'd be important to, again, ask questions, see where that leads. Any sexual play that is causing any discomfort, pain, or any negative impact on other children, or even on your own child, if let's say there's another child also, right, playing with them, those are things that you'd want to look into. Again, anything that causes physical or emotional discomfort, any sort of shame and guilt. There shouldn't be any sort of bribery or threat or force or even aggression involved with sexual play. So if you see that, that's also something where you would want to intervene. Any sexual play with animals or others with the intent to hurt. So again, these it's not necessarily, a common thing that people might see, but it would definitely be something that you'd want to address. Again, sexual behavior that's aimed towards, so let's say there's a younger child who's behaving sexually, aiming towards like older teens or adults, or if it's the other way around, so maybe an older like teenager towards their younger peers. It's not necessarily healthy sexual development there. Any behavior that's like aiming to objectify other people. So if there isn't really any sort of like respectful language surrounding like that, respectful language that they're using about others, that's a place where you want to step in and address that behavior. And again, just continued displays of sexual behavior in public. So again, these aren't necessarily, an indication that sexual abuse is happening. Could it potentially be a factor in the behavior that's occurring? Yes. And I just wanted to show, so there's still much, much, much more research that needs to be done on problem sexual behavior. But some studies have shown that between, young children that were displaying concerning sexual behavior suggest that between like 45 to 80% of them had been sexually victimized. Now that is a really large like range of people who were sexually victimized. However, like it also showed that some of these kids also, it was a result of either experiencing like physical or emotional maltreatment, maybe being exposed to domestic violence in the household, or exposure to sexuality and sexual behavior in the media, whether that be through the TV, the internet, or anything that they might be seeing at home, and other things that could be contributing to, a child's behavior that they could be expressing. And there may be some, stereotypes about like young boys that we may have heard, like, oh, young boys, they're hormonal or they're this or that, like you gotta, watch out for them, sort of thing. But concerning sexual behaviors are not, mainly coming from young boys. In fact, 65% of preschool children with sexual behavior issues are girls. So this isn't just, a gendered issue. This is something that happens with all children. And so we just wanted to, again, give these as like just a foundation for understanding what is healthy sexual exploration, what does that look like, and then what would be considered concerning, and a place where you should be intervening, should be coming in, asking questions, trying to understand kind of where this is coming from. And also just to know too, children with sexual behavior problems, they're more likely to engage in like impulsive sexual activity rather than it being like well-planned or like a rationalized act. And also like to know too, if there are any children that are harmed by another child from any sort of sexual behavior that has happened, the failure of a child to empathize with like the victim in these situations, it may not be pathological. It may just merely be a product of like that stage of development that they're in. So not to, I've heard some parents say like, oh, my child did this to another kid, and I'm like, I'm just worried. Or even the other way around, my child's a victim of sexual abuse, and I read somewhere that there's a likelihood that they themselves can sexually offend. And but just know that those two things, like, they're not linked with each other. And there's so much more, what's the word I want to use? There's so many more factors involved when it comes to sexually offending, and we don't necessarily have a training on that today, but so just know that if your child is exhibiting these behaviors, like, please reach out for support. You can discuss with the primary care physician, of a therapist, other additional supports, but ultimately speak to your child or speak to the child in your life, and just to try to understand where this may be coming from, because it may not be stemming from violence. It could be stemming from many other environmental factors occurring. And yeah, so I know we have a few minutes left. And we just threw a lot of information at you. But I'll pass this on to Kelsey.
Yeah, so for our last few minutes, we definitely want to hear any questions that folks have. The other thing that we want to do, and I think we'll sort of bring this into the part 2 of this training a little bit more, but I'm going to give it to you all today. I'll send it out in the follow-up email as well. We have a Jamboard that, if folks are not familiar with Jamboard, it's basically a way that a bunch of us could like edit this. It's sort of like a whiteboard where you can put little sticky notes up and you can write whatever you want on them. We have some prompts. There's 4 pages. So if you're looking at this and you see at the top, it says 1/4, and then there's arrows. You can click through to see there's 4 different pages with 4 different questions on them. And if you look on the left, you'll see a bar that has a little sticky note button on it. If you click on the sticky note, it'll pop up and you can write an answer and it'll go onto that page. Everybody is anonymous answering this. We cannot see who's putting what on there. So this is something you could do right now if you want, or you can hold on to it and maybe come back to it at some point over the next few weeks. We'll like debrief it a little bit more together on March 28th. Do folks have questions or comments about any of the information that you've heard today? You can feel free to use the chat or to unmute and speak to us.
And if not, that's completely okay. I know sometimes I walk away from a training and then I'm like, oh, like you're sitting with the information and wish that you could ask later. But we will be having another training towards the end of the month. I believe it's March 28th.
Yeah.
Yes, March 28th, 1:30 to 3. We'll also link the registration link for part 2 again. But yeah, just thank you so much, everyone, for coming to this training and learning with us. Yeah, it was very eye-opening for me researching into this, but also like kind of seeing how this all plays a role in my own personal life with the children that are in my life and maybe in the future will be in my life. And we're just always learning. So just know that it's a practice and we're just here to support you through anything and everything that we can.
And if anyone thinks of any questions between now and the 28th, if you're able to be with us, you can also feel free to email Amanda or myself. Amanda, would you type our email address in the chat? And we can bring those questions up at the second part, if you think of things as you're sort of processing this information over the next few weeks. We really view this as part of our work to prevent sexual violence because not only is it, the more we talk to the young people in our lives about our bodies and what's healthy and that it's okay to feel different things and to like talk about what's going on with your body or with your feelings, we're not only more likely to be able to like intervene early if there is something harmful happening to a young person. But it's actually a way that is going to help keep kids safe. Amanda talked about language before, that having like correct body part language, being able to talk about genitals using language that all adults are going to know what it means, is a safety mechanism for young people. But also the more kids know like what's okay and what's not okay for their body, they're going to know how to treat their peers, how they can expect to be treated and things like that. So we're so happy to have had so many of you here today.